Welcome to the Peer Perspective podcast, where we dive into real stories of recovery, resilience, and hope. I'm your host, Kyle Van Blaricum, and today we have an incredible journey to share with you. But before we begin, if you know anyone that might be inspired by today's message, or to just know that they're not alone in whatever it is they're going through, please take a moment to share the podcast with them. Your support helps us reach more people who need to hear these powerful stories. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow the Peer Perspective so you never miss an episode. Let's get started. I am incredibly honored and excited to introduce my next guest to you. Sonya is a mother, a wife, a peer supporter, and a role model for people in the recovery community. In her current role, Sonya supports families that are navigating the child welfare system in Florida. Her testimony brings awareness to the challenges that many face while navigating these systems, while providing hope that recovery is possible. I am honored to have spent the time that I did with her, getting to know her, and I'm so impressed by her journey and how she's able to show up for people today. Without further ado, please enjoy the episode.
Absolutely. So, my name is Sonya, and I am a Sarasota, Florida native. I've lived in sunny Sarasota for my whole life, except for a very brief period of time. But, I always like to tell people that my addiction story started with trauma. And I think it's really important for people to know that because I've heard a lot of stigmatizing statements and, people believing that it was a choice to become an addict, and it was a choice for me to use drugs the first time I used drugs, right? It was a choice for me to drink alcohol the first time I drank alcohol, but I didn't know I was gonna become an addict when that happened, and when I started drinking and using drugs, it was a way to cope with the pain that I was going through and to numb my feelings and run from the trauma because in my younger years, I went through, like, one traumatic thing after another, and for a teenager with no coping skills, drugs and alcohol were the coping skill. And so from being sexually abused to physically abused to losing a child at 16 years old and then the father of that child passing away very shortly after that. I mean, it was just a lot of stuff for a teenage girl to go through. And so when I found substances, that was the solution to my problems. And everybody that I knew around me, they drank and used drugs recreationally, and it wasn't a big deal. So I didn't know until I was, like, in my 30s that most of those people were actually alcoholics and addicts. Like, I just thought it was a normal thing and, like, a rite of passage, and that one day I would get over the phase, but the phase never went away, and then I found out that I got sick when I didn't use, and so I had to continue using drugs, so it progressed very quickly for me.
Um, can you talk a little bit about, we all have consequences in our use, but how did that look like for you?
Well, so the consequences didn't start right away. And when I started using drugs, I was 11 years old when I put the first substance in my body. The first person that ever gave me a substance was the person that sexually abused me. So, what I know now as an adult is that that person was grooming me and they used substances as a way to take advantage of me later. At first it was like, "Oh, I'll give you substances and we'll keep it a secret, right? We won't tell anybody." But that secret turned into a bigger secret of them getting away with sexually abusing me. And so that's really like where I say where all of the trauma began and where my addiction really began. But the consequences came years later. So I be honest with you, drugs were fun in the beginning, right?
Oh
I
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
become addicted because they weren't fun. It was a hell of a lot of fun for a very long time. But, even, like, when I was 16 years old and I lost my first child, the person that got me pregnant passed away from an overdose. And so I would say, like, that's really where the consequences began, but I didn't recognize that it was a result of our using, like, I knew that he'd overdosed, but it was an accidental overdose, and he took 1.5 pain pills and he overdosed. The first time I got arrested, I was 18 years old. But, I wasn't actually there when the crime was committed, although I had been there lots of other times, and so it was always like these little justifications, right? That I could say, "Oh, it wasn't really my using that caused this. It was just something that happened. It was, like, their fault that this happened," or, like, the cops, or, like, the person that snitched on me, or, like, it was always something else, but I
Wrong
never
place,
really.
wrong time. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
I hear you.
Yeah. So, but yeah, the consequences didn't get really bad until I was in my like 20s when I started having encounters with the Department of Children and Families. Because even times when I went to jail, like I would never go to jail for more than like a day or two. And they would always release me. And I had this whole like young, sweet little innocent girl act going on. And so I could get away with a lot of stuff as a younger girl. But I mean, eventually that didn't work when I started to get felonies and,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep. The progression, right? They
hmm
start to recognize you. I know how that goes. Yeah. Um, all right. So when did you find your recovery? I mean, what did that look like for you? I know if, like for me, I had had some exposure to like 12-step programs. I'd gone to treatment more times than I can count. Um, was it, yeah, if you want to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of share like where it started to crumble because it was a
Sure.
really, like you say, a progression, right? It was a long progression.
Okay.
So when I was in my 20s is when I started having the Department of Children and Families, also known around the world as CPS, right? Child Protective Services. That's when I started having encounters with CPS. Down here in Florida, they call it DCF, Department of Children and Families. And so that's when I started having encounters with them. My kids were about 3 and 5 the first time that I had them taken away from me. First time I had an investigation, my youngest son was 6 weeks old, and so I had a lot of encounters with them, but the first time they actually separated us was when they were 3 and 5 years old. And all they really wanted me to do was like, you know, get sober, go to parenting classes, take substance use classes, take their drug screens, let them come to my house when they wanted to, and really just like monitor me to make sure I was doing the right thing. But, my problem is couldn't do the right thing. Like I didn't know how to do the right thing. And because using was my only coping skill, I continued to use, but I had found this like middle ground, right? My middle ground was I will just fake all of my drug tests so that I'm actually passing them, and I can still continue to use drugs and get away with it. But, I mean, essentially, like, I can't get away with it because when I'm using, everybody knows that I'm using, and so it was obvious that I was using, and they wanted me to do a hair follicle test.
Mm.
So, I knew that the gig was up and I knew I wasn't gonna be able to pass the hair follicle test. And so I had to make a decision. My husband and I had to make a decision to send the kids to live with my mom like indefinitely. And we didn't know, when we would get them back, but we didn't officially lose custody of them either because we were the ones that made that decision. So they closed the case in non-compliance. And the kids lived with my mom. But what that did to me and him, my husband, is it sent us on this like spiral, right? Because I hate myself so much because I can't stop using for my kids. And because I hate myself so much and my only coping skill is to use, like I'm going to continue to use drugs because I obviously have to numb the pain. And because I continue to use drugs and continue to numb that pain, it got me further and further and further away from ever seeing my kids again. And that's where the consequences really started to get bad because I had so much like self-loathing and self-hatred that I didn't care like who I hurt or who I stole from or how I hurt myself or what kind of crimes I committed. Like I didn't care anymore. And that led to a lot of bad choices, it led to a lot of crime. And eventually it led to my husband getting really, really sick. And so in 2016, he, started, like, running really, really high fevers, and when I say high fever, I mean, like, 106-degree fever, like, he was up there, like, his brain could have boiled, right?
Yeah.
And he would be, like, laying under the covers shivering and sweating and, like, going in and out of consciousness, and so we knew that there was something wrong, but we weren't really sure what it was. And so eventually I talked him into going to the hospital. And when he got there, they had him like do a urine test to test his levels. And the urine looked like sweet tea. And so when the test came back, the doctor said to him, she said, listen, your kidneys are failing. And if you leave the hospital, you're going to die tonight. Like, we need you to stay. And so after talking to him for a few minutes, we convinced him to stay in the hospital. But you have to remember, like, he was actively using at the time. And so even with your life literally hanging in the balance, he didn't know how to stop using. And so he went to the hospital and stayed long enough to find out that he had a bacterial infection in his blood. He was septic. Um, and he had what they call Staph aureus, which is similar to MRSA, but it's I guess a little easier to treat than MRSA. It's kind of the counterpart of MRSA is the way I think of it. But the staph infection had spread throughout his whole entire body because it was in his bloodstream, and so it had gone into his heart and into his lungs and then into his kidneys. And so the heart had this like vegetation on it, which caused him to have endocarditis, and then his kidneys were in failure, and then he had like this built up fluid inside of his lungs from just infection. And so what happened is they wanted him to do 42 days of IV antibiotics, something called vicamycin, which is a very, very strong antibiotic. But he couldn't stay at the hospital because, I mean, obviously he was detoxing, so he had to go use, right? And then when he would use, he would get super duper 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 sick, and then he would have to, go back to the hospital because he was so sick he couldn't breathe. His lungs would fill back up with the fluid, and he would just have all these like he would blow up like a balloon. It was really bad.
Ah,
And so we would check him back into the hospital and he would start that process all over again, the 42 days of antibiotics. And so eventually, it got so bad that they had to put him on dialysis for his kidneys because the heart medicine was making the kidneys worse. And they had tubes going in on each side of his chest from the infected fluid in his lungs to clean his lungs out. And so he was literally like stuck to the hospital bed and he couldn't go anywhere.
mm,
And so they started the treatment of antibiotics while he was in there. And he finally got the 42 days worth of antibiotic treatment. And that process took 6 months for him to like actually stay and get the 45 days, 42 days of antibiotics. Because every time that he would start, he would leave and go use and come back and go use and come back. And so, um, I just share that because that is what addiction and what using does to you, like he knew that he could potentially die, but he just had to go get the next one so that he wasn't sick because to be honest, like those people in the hospital were a-holes and they
yeah,
treated him like crap, they treated him like he was just a for lack of better words, and I would never say this, but this is the way it felt, is they treated him like he was just like a junkie, you know what I mean?
yeah.
So, it was tough, but he did finally start to get better, and then he kind of started his process to recovery. As soon as he got out of the hospital, he got arrested for stealing, and he took a treatment court here in Sarasota that they call comprehensive treatment court. And so that started his process of recovery because they sent him to like rehab and then they'd set him up in a halfway house. And then when he would get to the halfway house, he would relapse. And so they would rearrest him and they'd send him to rehab and then they put him in a halfway house and then he would get out and then he would use and it would start like the process over and over again. But honestly, like he needed all of those relapses. And, relapse can very much be a part of somebody's recovery. And for many, many, many of us, it is a big part of our stories. And I really believe that, sometimes we need that relapse. Like sometimes we need to learn from it, we need to grow from it, and hope to God we make it back from it. Right. And in his case,
Absolutely.
yeah. So in his case, like he did make it back from those relapses. And what kept pulling him out is that every time that he would get out, he would try to find me and save me. And I wasn't savable at that time. Like I wasn't ready to be saved. So, um, But where I was at, speaking of, is I was in a really bad place, right? Because by that point in time, I had lost my kids. I had lost my husband. My family wanted nothing to do with me. I was not allowed to be anywhere around them. Like, I am the person that used drugs so heavily and hurt people so bad that when I went over to my mom's house, she would hide her car keys in her pocket, lock her purse in the car, and have all valuables locked in the safe whenever I came over because I stole everything. Like, as long anything that stood between me and getting the next one, I was gonna take it, you know? And so again, like, I just share that to say, like, that I've made it to the other side, right? So if you are that person, if you've made it to that part, like, we do dumb shit, right? We do dumb
Yep.
shit when we're using, and it is what it is. Like, there is hope. We can make it to the other side. Um, but so nobody wanted me around, and I had already lost everything at that point in time, and using was my only coping skill. And so what I did was I put myself in very, very dangerous situations. Um, I used my body to get what I wanted to get, right? To use drugs. Like, I disrespected myself to continue using drugs. I put myself in some really dangerous situations by doing that. And so there were a couple of years from 2016 until 2019 when I got clean that it got really, really, really dark. And I don't really like to, like, go into the details of that, but it was just really bad. But what did happen, and to be honest, like, I'm kinda glad that I went through that in a way because in some weird, like, way, I needed to see that because I needed to know that this is where my life was taking me, and I could either have that or I can have what I have now, you know? So in a weird way, like, going through that serves me well today. But on my birthday, July 19th of 2018, I got arrested, and, I was not happy about being arrested on my birthday because how dare you arrest me on my birthday? Like, come on. Because the cop knew me, like, he knew me, he knew my people, he had towed my cars, like, this guy was hot on my tail. So, I just was so pissed because he was actually, like, waiting for me to pull out of the trap house that I was at. So, essentially, like, he had set me up, okay? So I was, like, really pissed at him for arresting me on my birthday, but, when I look back in hindsight, like, that is the breaking point that
Mm.
got me to where I am today. So, I go to jail on all of these felonies because I thought I was slick, and I thought that I could sneak drugs into the jail. Well, guess what? That is a very serious felony, so do not try doing something like that.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. That actually was the felony that got me in the most trouble. So I got a couple of possession charges and then the smuggling contraband charge. And so, I had got released from jail a few days after being there. And then as soon as I got out, like, the caveat to my release was to not use drugs. I got out on supervised release. And so as soon as I got out, like, I went right back to people, places, and things because I didn't know any better. Like, I had never lived another life. I didn't know recovery was possible. I had been to meetings, like, I'd been to some NA meetings and to some AA meetings and to some CA meetings, but quite frankly, like, I thought all those people were just full of it. I really thought they were full of it. I thought they had learned how to moderate their usage. I thought that was a thing, but it's
Right.
it's not a thing. At least for me, it's not a thing. So, from 2018 until 2019, I went in and out of jail over and over again. And every time they would release me, they would say the same thing. They would say, just don't use. And this is really where I learned that I needed help. And so every time I would get released, I would go back to the same place and I would use again against my own will, right? Because I knew I didn't wanna go back to jail, and I knew if I used, that's what was gonna happen, but every time I would get out, I would go back and do the same thing over and over again. And so, eventually on one of those arrests, I tried to falsify a drug test in the probation office, and that did not go so well. So
Hmm.
my probation officer called, well, first of all, I went to jail that night, okay? And, my probation officer called DCF on me, Department of Children and Families, and he knew that sometimes I would like go visit my kids at my mom's house, and he didn't want me to do that apparently. So not only did he take me to jail, but that started a judicial case plan. And so now I have a time period that I've got to work this case plan if I ever want to have custody of my kids again. But I mean, not to say that that stopped me from using drugs, because it didn't. Like, I went to jail, I sat in jail a little while, had the best intentions in the world that I was going to stop using drugs, and then I got out and I went back to using, because I went back to the same people, places, and things. But the last time, and this is where I found recovery at, the last time that I got arrested was July 1st of 2019. Now my birth date is 7/19 and my clean date is 7/1/19. And so to me, my clean date is very special because I feel like it's the day that I was reborn.
Mm.
And it was very much like a birth, right? It was painful, it was messy, I cried a lot, but it was the most beautiful thing ever, on the other side of it. It was literally like a rebirth. And so,
Mm.
right before I got arrested, I was living in a shed behind a trap house. Like, I was literally living in the backyard of a trap house, okay? And there was no toilet, no shower, no refrigerator, no food, no water. Like, literally, I was in a dirty ass shed with a bed. Like, I had set up this little bed inside this dirty ass little shed. And I thought that's where I wanted to be, right? Because that's where my drug of choice was. And I had an ample supply of my drug of choice. So I thought that's where I wanted to be. But really, everything else that I loved and wanted in my life was so far away from me that that's not really what I wanted. Like, that's what my diseased thinking had thought that I wanted. And so, anyways, I wake up to a knock at the door on July 1st, 2019, because I had a warrant for my arrest for evading the law, for escaping or eluding whatever, like not going back to probation is essentially what happened. And so my mom called Crime Stoppers on me. I don't know if you ever heard of Crime Stoppers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got them.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So they came and
So,
found you.
yeah, they came and found me, and my mom got paid $280 to turn me in.
Nice.
Yeah, she said, "It's about time your crime paid me back."
It's funny that you can laugh about it now. I'm sure you weren't very thrilled in the moment, but
No, not at all. No, I was not, but, I mean, it was the thing that saved my life, and when I look back, I'm so grateful, because she was terrified for me. Like, she had my kids, she held it down for a long time while I was getting my life together. I mean, she took my kids when I would say, like, 2014, 2015 is when she, like, officially took them, and it wasn't until 2019 until actually 2020, because I had to get clean and get my shit together first. So it was 2020 before I was able to actually get them back. And so she had them during that whole time. And she knew that every day I was using fentanyl, and every day I was, she was terrified. So I
right.
don't blame her for doing that. And I'm actually really glad that she did when I look back on it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so much of your story I can relate to. I just, as you're kind of sharing with me, like I'm getting goosebumps. It's just like amazing that you were able to come out the other side of that, and yeah, it's impressive. I I think back to kind of my own experience, and you know it's like you have every intention sitting in that jail cell to get out and do good, but you have no idea what that looks like. You have no idea, you know like I remember times I'd get out of jail, and by the time I got to the other side of the parking lot I was already, you
Yep.
know using. And it's like, I spent a little time in prison, and 30 months, for most people that would be enough time to get your head straight, right? And within 2 weeks I was using, and
Hmm.
so it's just, um yeah, if you don't, I guess, learn a better way, or it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's
That's
it's
exactly what it is, though. I mean, you're right. So people go to prison, and I'm glad that I had a timeout when I went to jail. Like, I needed
right.
that timeout, And I'm glad that I went. So I'll kind of tell you like as we go along, but I went to a place in the jail called the Recovery Pod. And that's
Mm,
where I started to learn a different way. But like what you were talking about, right? Like when you went to prison for 30 months, did you ever have a recovery like
no.
meeting come in? Like did I mean,
No.
what do they expect us to do, you
Right.
know?
Right. Yeah, you do a couple classes or whatever to get out early, and then you're right back to it. I mean, and I think back, like, that's yeah, I had no foundation.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
um okay, so I'm just doing the math here. So you have been in recovery for like 4 or 5 years?
I just celebrated 5 years.
That's
Yes.
right. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
And you were actually just you had a I gotta pull this up here. So the Florida Institute of Child Welfare is Professional of the Year. So you just got
Mhm.
that award, and I saw the video for that. Can you
Did
talk a
you?
little bit? Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. So, just kind of like, I want to also just mention what you said
Good.
about like the foundation, right?
Yeah.
Because when I was in jail, like that's where I started to build my foundation at. And when I got out of jail, like I went through treatment because I was court ordered to go to treatment and I got
Right.
very involved in my recovery program. And I knew right away that I wanted to do service work and to give back to others because I would not have recovery if it were not for folks with lived experience. Like meeting people who had been in my situation is the reason that not only did I find recovery, that I found hope in recovery, that I was able to learn how to be the person I am today, and that I still continue to walk the path that I walk today is because of people with lived experience. And so, because of that connection and the connections that I have made along the way, I knew right away that I wanted to give back. And so as soon as I had my first opportunity to start doing service work, right? Like to go into I did the detox for 18 months. We have a detox here, and I used to go to the detox every Friday and share my story. And then I would go to there. We have another program here called Mothers and Infants, and I would go there once a month and just literally any opportunity that I could go and give away what was so freely given to me. Like I did that. I did anything that I could to help out because I knew that if I was as bad as I was, and trust and believe when I tell you I was bad, like I knew if I could do it, that anybody could do it. And it takes people like you and me to believe in people like you and me because nobody else believes in us. You know what I mean? Like we need each other. Like my family didn't believe in me when I first got out of jail. They're like, "Oh, is she going to do it? Is it going to be today?" You know what I mean? But thankfully, like I had women in my life that were like, "We believe in you, just for today. You can do this. And I'm here for you." And so that part was such a big part of my story and a big part of why I do what I do today. And so, as I said, like I got really involved in service work and doing those things, going into the treatment center that I went through, and then eventually getting into the jail and going into the jail that I was at, and just giving back in any way that I could. And I really thought for me that doing service work and recovery would be like the end all be all, like that's where that's where it's gonna land for the rest of my life, and I was cool with that.
Right.
And I still do that. But so about 2 years ago, I started to hear about lived experience, like what that means professionally. You know what I mean? Like meeting people who have lived experience that actually get paid, and I do it for free, honestly. And most of us would, right? But that actually like can make a career of helping other people as somebody with lived experience. So literally like my felonies and my experience with child welfare is what qualifies me for this job, which is so wild. And I have to say, I was watching one of your podcasts because when we started talking, I watched one of your podcasts and I can't remember her name, but she had mentioned something about her felonies and going and helping other felons. And
Hmm.
was her name Linda? Was that what her name was?
Was it Katie?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to look and I'll have to
Okay.
follow up with you about
Yeah.
that. But
Sounds good. Yeah.
I'm just so glad to hear that they're doing
Yeah.
that in other places. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it,
I can
yeah.
I can tell you, I've never been into gone into a job interview where you're talking about your felonies, you're talking about your experience, going to jail, and they're like, oh, that's great, you're going to be great, like what kind of interview is this?
Yes, yes. I went through that same interview and they're like asking me all these questions. So, okay. So 2 years ago, I got a friend of mine in recovery. She actually had seen my story on social media and we knew each other, but she didn't necessarily know like parts of my story. But I share my story on social media and stuff. And so she knew that I had to have child welfare experience. And so she reached out to me and she's like, hey, we're getting ready to start this program and I think you would be perfect for it and we're going to help people who are in the child welfare system. And so at the time, like it was really just meant to be, right? Because I was working in real estate and at that time Facebook was like blowing up for me and I was doing really well and I'm like, "You know what? Do real estate. My mom did real estate. My dad does, or both of my parents do real estate. Like, I don't want to do that. Okay. So I'm not gonna, like, I'm just not gonna. And the place that I was working at, I put in my 2 weeks notice. Literally a week after I put in my notice, my friend reaches out to me about this job opportunity
Wow.
and she sends me the job description. And I read the job description and I just start crying because this is what we were talking about right before we started going on air on the podcast. When we went through this, when most people go through the child welfare system, they feel alone. They feel stigmatized, they feel shameful, they feel guilty. I mean, it is just such a hard thing to go through by yourself. And you have all of these people with letters behind their name pointing their finger at you, saying all the things that you've done wrong and that you still continue to do wrong, even if you're busting your ass trying to do the right thing. And then you walk up in court, and I mean, you have all these people like, the state of whatever against you. And this is the most important thing to the world to you. Like your children are the most important thing in the world to you. Even if your actions don't show that, it still is because when we're using, we do things we would not normally do, right? And so even though I wasn't living right and I wasn't doing right, my kids were the most important thing to me. And that is part of what kept me out for so long because I hated myself so much because I couldn't stop using for them. It just propelled like it perpetuated the cycle. And so anyways, I read this job opportunity and I'm like, wow, this is just I mean, amazing. I'm so excited. And so I do this interview and there's 3 people on the interview, and they're like, "Yeah, tell me about your trauma, and tell me about, like, your drug use, and tell me about, like, your criminal history." I'm like,
And
"Alright, y'all
those
wanna
things would
hear
get
it."
you disqualified in any other setting. It's so
Yes.
it's great.
Yeah, and also too, like, it wasn't just, like, a big trauma dump, like, I told them about who I am in my recovery today,
Right,
like,
right.
I've utilized a lot of the resources, and that's why people with lived experience are so valuable because we have actually walked through the process, and so I know what resource to reach out to for housing, like, I know what resource to reach out to, if you need food or a therapist or whatever, like anything, because I walked through it myself. So I know what it feels like and what to do in those cases. And so that's why, we are so valuable. But anyways, like to kind of get to the award. So I've been doing this for the last actually I'm coming up on 2 years this month. And I work for NAMI of Sarasota Manatee Counties, and NAMI is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. It's the largest grassroots, peer-led mental health organization in the nation. And so what that means is that everybody at NAMI is a peer. It's a non-clinical organization. And I love that so much because there is no like hierarchy of somebody that has like a licensed mental health degree that's overseeing me. I mean, we're all peers. We've all been through something and you can still work your way up to the top and grow within the company with being a peer. So I really love that I am at NAMI specifically, but the program that I work in is called Parents for Parents. And so we support parents who are navigating the child welfare system. Well, I've been doing it for about 2 years now. And about I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, I got an email and somebody had nominated me for an award for the Florida Institute of Child Welfare. I was nominated as Child Welfare Professional of the Year in the category of lived experience. And I just have to tell you, like, when I read that job description, I was just, or job description, I'm sorry. When I read that nomination and saw that I was selected for the award, In so many ways, like, I can't even describe to you. First of all, I've never won anything before, but in so many ways, like, I felt like I was, in a way, like, carrying the torch for parents like me. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just about me. This can be for any parent who has been through anything. I mean, with the right tools and the right resources and the right support, we're capable of anything. And I think if nothing else, like that's what that award says to me.
So do you work directly with parents?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yes. So I'll give you kind of like the setup, right?
Sure.
So what we do in the last 2 years, we've served over 250 parents, and
Wow.
yeah, which is amazing. And also, like 250 parents in my county have been involved in the child welfare
Oh
system.
yeah,
That's also
yeah,
very sad, right?
yeah.
Um, yeah, I wish there was no need for jobs like that, but there is. So
Right.
anyways, that's a whole different rant there,
Mhm.
but essentially what we do is we meet the parent at the very first hearing. So
Oh wow.
what they call a shelter hearing. And the shelter hearing is the hearing where the judge determines whether or not the removal is valid. And that is determined by their probable cause. So I'm not an attorney. I just know from like observing and all of this stuff. But the judge will actually introduce us to the parent during the hearing. So it's great because we get their stakeholder buy in, right? So the attorneys know we're there. The judge introduces us, and the case managers, they know about us. We work kind of collaboratively with them, although we don't report anything or document anything.
Sure. Yep.
um but they all encourage the parents to work with us, which is really helpful because we need them to do that.
Right.
Um, and so we start working with them right away. And as soon as the hearing is over, we call them, we share some of our lived experience. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful parts of our program
Mm.
because just like, in my story, when I heard the women at the jail share their story, that's where I found my hope through the people with lived experience. And so I really believe that hope gives us strength in order to do things that we would not otherwise maybe be able to do. And so hearing from us right when that shelter hearing happens and saying, "Hey, listen, I've been there before. I made it through to the other side. I got my kids back, and I know you can do it too. You're not a bad parent. You're not a bad person. Like, we all make mistakes. Some of us get caught, some of us don't, but we're going to
Right.
support you through this if you want our support." And so from that point in time, we offer the parent education about the system. And so, like we were talking about earlier as well, they have no idea what's going on. Like, they're just people
Right.
living their lives now that you've taken their kids from
Mm.
them. And now they have to do X, Y, and Z. And usually it's more like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, X to be able to get their kids back, and they
Mm.
don't know what to do or who to call or when to start the class or any of those things. And
Right.
so we teach them that in that class. We give them a class called Dependency 101 where they teach them everything that they need to know essentially to get through the dependency system. And then we continue to support them as they go through it. So we'll continue to re-educate them on things or teach them how to advocate for themselves or just be a sounding board and offer peer support. I mean, sometimes you just need to like yell or vent or cry or talk, or, I mean, we're here for all of that. And
Right.
so then we support them like at their subsequent hearings and at their case meetings, like the staffings, we support them at those. And we don't ever speak for them. Like, I'm not their case manager. I'm not
Right.
there to advocate for them. I'm there to teach them to advocate for themselves. And so we
Right.
just, essentially we just support them through the process until hopefully they get to reunification. But if that's not going to happen for them, which of course we hope it does, but if
Right.
that's not going to happen, we're not going to drop them. I mean, we're still
Sure.
going to support them no matter what happens. And
Mm.
so in this, 2 years, like we've supported 200 over 250 parents in that time and seen many parents reunify, and unfortunately some have not, but for
Right.
the most part, like even if they don't, we've been able to make connections with them that I really hope will last well beyond this 1 or 2 years that they're involved in the system.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking back to like sitting in that courtroom and they're all speaking, the legalese and it goes right over your head. How impactful it would have been to have somebody sitting there with you to support you in that moment. I mean, probably the lowest point in your life or one of them, right? And, feeling alone in that, I just think um, you know, I just see how beneficial that could be, and
Mhm.
also building the trust. I mean, you're literally at ground zero in your life, and um, there's kind of a way out or a person that can help you.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful stuff,
Exactly.
you know.
And I just want to comment on something you just said, like that legalese, right? And that's so true because when you're in there, first of all, if you haven't already burned all your bridges, which a lot of us have,
Mm,
they're going to go around and talk to all of your friends and family and ask them questions about you and identify themselves in the process, which if you did have any support, it's going to burn that bridge right then and there because everybody and their mother thinks that you're wrong if you have your kids taken away. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. They don't want to know the facts. They just know that you got your kids taken away and you are bad for that, right? A lot of people have this huge, horrible stigma around the child welfare system. And most people think that the parent did something wrong. And in many cases, like the parent couldn't pay their bill. Like the
right.
parent could lost their housing. Like it can be as simple as that. A lot of times it's neglect and there's disproportionalities between, white families and black families. Like that is true. It is facts. You can look it up and find it yourself. But that legalese thing that you were speaking of, like that's what happens. Like a parent gets in the courtroom, all their support systems have been burned or bridges burned or, are not a part of their lives because they're so mad at the parent for letting this happen. And then they're in the courtroom and they don't understand what the hell's going on because they're hearing CLS and DCF and SCC and all of these things, and they don't know what's going on. And so
Yeah.
we actually teach them what the acronyms are. So we give them a pamphlet. Like if you hear these acronyms, this is what that means.
Yeah, I mean, thank God that uh, you're able to be there for people. I'm just thinking in Wisconsin, what a huge opportunity we have here.
Hmm.
Yeah, don't get me. That's a whole separate episode. So,
Yeah.
okay, so you talked a little bit about how you got into peer support, what peer support looks like for your organization. How do you see the future of peer supporting in your organization or with the individuals that you serve now?
Well, I will say, so again, like I love my organization so much and for so many reasons. Number one, like we are a peer support agency, organization. Like that is what we do and we do it good. But part of that, and the reason I say that, one of the reasons I say that is because we actually eventually will employ the people we serve, right?
Wow.
And so that's the goal. Like my parent partner that works with me, she was one of my first parents and now she works alongside of us and we have opportunities for our program participants, community people, like anybody that wants to become a peer. We offer the educational class, the 40-hour class that you have to take. I don't know how it is everywhere, but that's how it is in Florida. You have to do a 40-hour class and then 500 hours of supervision where you're actually working with people. And so we offer that at NAMI, which is really cool. But I'm going to tell you something. This peer movement is blowing up right now. And we are going to be in every system of care, in every core room, every school. Like you watch because we are coming and it's happening. So just take note of that.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I've seen such a influx here. I mean, police stations, hospitals. I work pretty closely with the county that I live in now, and I mean, we're in every single division. It's pretty exciting times, and I think with that comes a lot of um, a lot of people don't really know what our role is. So
Mhm.
you got to navigate that and you got to be able to educate people and you have to have a clear understanding of what your role actually is because you can turn into a case manager real quick.
Yeah.
You know, you know how that goes.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
that's such a good point, and I wanna say something about that. You're right, you can turn into it's called role drift, right? Like, when you drift from what your role is supposed to be into another person's role, and if you do have a peer at an organization, I believe, in my opinion, that it's always better to have at least more than one, at least. Hopefully, you have several, but at least have more than one so that that individual can have somebody else to bounce things off of, and to kind of just have their back. You know what I mean? because as peers, like we take on a lot of other people's, like we feel it, we've been there, like we feel that stuff, we need somebody to debrief with and to just kind of be a sounding board for us. And oftentimes, like when we're working with a case manager or a therapist, they will think that we are their assistant, right? And so because we aren't as qualified as they are, although let me tell you, like I got a PhD in street life, so we are
Right,
qualified.
right.
But yeah, what I want to say about that though is that I think it's really important for us. In a way, I feel like we have to go above and beyond to prove that we really do deserve to be here, and your organization or any organization or system of care is lucky to have us. We are an asset to wherever we go because of what we have been through. And as peers, we need to recognize that in order to continue to do this work, we have to continue to work on ourselves, and we have to continue to keep our program of recovery or our mental health recovery or whatever it is in our lives, whatever challenges that we face, we have to continue to do the work and show up for ourselves if we want to continue to do good work in the community.
Absolutely. Yeah. Self-care is a real thing and it's so important. You know, you start burning out and you're not going to be able to show up for anybody, including
Mhm.
yourself, including your family. Um, yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, can you share a success story or maybe, you shared about the award that you just got, but maybe like a
Mhm.
family or I don't know.
Yeah. I have a success story for you.
Okay. Okay.
So, and I know she would be okay with me saying this. I'm not going to say her name to protect her privacy. Obviously, I'm bound by HIPAA laws as well. But I have a mom, right? And so in the state of Florida, and I don't know how it is in other places, but in the state of Florida, when you have your parental rights terminated, that's what they call the civil death penalty. That's what it's labeled as here. And so what that means is that a parent, when you have your rights terminated, there's no going back. You don't get your rights back after that. Well, I have a parent that I've been working with for really almost 2 years now. And she had her parental rights terminated in 2015, I believe it was. And she had 3 daughters. 2 of them found her after they turned 18, and 1 was still in the system. And about a year ago, they changed the law in Florida where they made a pathway for a parent who's had their rights terminated to have an opportunity to have their rights reinstated. And so with this law, it's very, very the qualifications are very like stringent. Like it's hard to qualify for this law. Your
Sure.
child has to be 13 or over, you have to be terminated for more than 3 years, and the child cannot be in a placement, meaning that they cannot have found a forever home. And so if you can qualify for those things and you have had no new criminal interactions, no new civil interactions, then you can apply to have your rights reinstated. So, this mom that I know, we started working with her a while ago. She is actually the first parent in this area to ever have her rights reinstated after a termination of parental rights. And when I tell you, like, it makes me emotional to think about it because I'm so, so proud of her. But this
Yeah.
mom went like above and beyond to do everything that she needed to do to get her baby back. And her daughter is happily living back home with her right now. I actually talked to her this week. I talk to her all the time. Like I'm
Yeah.
so, so proud of her. But that's the kind of stuff that we do. Like it's literally miraculous work, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
that's pretty powerful stuff when you get to see kind of I mean, ultimately it's their work, but just being a part of that, it's pretty amazing.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about the barriers that you see with your role or with the individuals that you serve?
Yes. So first of all, I want to talk about this barrier because it is a big barrier and we need to fix this stuff.
Okay.
So, as a peer, right? They want you to come with a background, come with your experience in the system, come with your criminal history, come with those things that qualify you to be a peer. And if you're going to get funding from the state or the feds or the county, they want you to then be able to pass a level 2 background check. And
Mm,
so let me just say that is a huge barrier and it needs to be changed. So, thankfully, like my organization worked with me in that process of getting my background check done. Like, I have to go through an exemption because of my criminal history. I'm a 4-time convicted felon. And so I had to go through the exemption process. And it's taken me like, I still have yet to get my exemption. I'm at the last stage though. Like, I'm literally just waiting on the papers to show up at my house to say that you've got it. But I had to wait almost 18 months before I could even start the process because you have to be 3 years off paper,
mm,
not meaning 3 years since you committed a crime, like 3 years since you were discharged from probation or any kind of services. You have to have all your court costs paid. Like, you can't
mm.
have any new. I mean, it's like, why do they make us go through this? This is ridiculous. Like, that's why I'm here because of what I've been through. So why are you trying to make me jump through flaming hoops again? You know what I
Right.
mean?
So is that through like a state licensing board, or is that through? Okay, okay. So we have
Yeah,
something similar here. Not so much for PeerSupport, but other licenses. It sounds
really?
like
You
it's a
don't have
similar.
that for peer support?
No,
Oh, I love that.
and,
That's
and it
awesome.
it might be more depending on the organization you work for, but I know for me it was, you know, I was pretty transparent about it in my background and it wasn't a problem. So,
Yeah.
but it's, yeah, it sounds like some gatekeeping,
That's
to,
exactly what it is. Yeah. And we have to get to become a certified recovery peer specialist, a CRPS is what they call it here. And it's called different things in different places, but it means peer specialist, peer support, whatever. So in order to get that, you have to go through the Florida Certification Board, just like a licensed mental health therapist or any kind of certification or licensure, you have to go through the Florida Certification Board. And so we have to pass the level 2 background check to get the certificate.
got it.
But that qualifies me to work with children. I'm not working with kids. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Right,
Like,
right.
there should be a separate pathway. And that's why I got so excited when I was listening to your podcast the other night, because the woman that spoke said they don't have to go through that. And as a felon, she can work with people who are incarcerated or in prison. Yes.
Right. Yep. And I think, um, yeah, it's probably different in every state. And, but yeah, I mean, that background is what helps you in this position. So to
Right.
say that somebody's not, can't get that, I don't know, it's kind of strange to me, but
Mhm.
at least there's a pathway forward, and it sounds like, you're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel there. So
Yeah, finally. And that's
finally.
another thing too. Like, let me just say, so in order to get the exemption, you have to send in all your court records. You got to give them an explanation for
Mm,
everything. Like, and here's the thing, I don't remember half the stuff, right? Because I
right.
was high. So
Yep.
it was a
Yeah,
process.
I have a friend that just went through for social work, and she had a similar situation. She had to send in every arrest,
Yep.
everything going back, from the beginning of time. So
hmm
they want to see it all. And then they just approved her. So it's like,
Yep.
all right, you guys
That's what
can't
I'm
pull that.
waiting on.
You guys can't just pull that information yourself. I don't know. Seems kind of
And they can because it's through them. But yeah, they want us to do the work. But you're right, though. Like, getting through to the other side, it's going to be worth it. And that's why I've been patient and persistent and persevered through the process, because it is worth it to me to have that exemption.
Oh, that's awesome. Sonia, I am just so impressed by everything that you've shared today. I have to tell you, when Patrick, I kind of gave him a list of people. I'm like, okay, here, reach out to these people, see what they say. And you were at the top of that list. And so when you agreed, I was just like, I was so happy. And then hearing your testimony today, I'm just, it's it's powerful. And I think, well, you know, you have a huge following, and just seeing how you show up for people in Florida and the families that you serve, I'm really impressed, and I appreciate you so much for sharing with me today, being incredibly vulnerable. You know, I want to give you kind of this last opportunity, you know, if there's anything else you'd like to share, or you think, yeah.
I would just say the last thing that I want to share is to whomever may be listening to this right now. And I just want to say don't give up on people. You never know when somebody's time is going to be. It might take somebody 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, 50 times of going to detox or treatment or jail or, banging their head against the wall for them to finally get it. And then one day, they finally get it and they're ready and their time comes. And so I just encourage you to be that person for them that fearlessly believes in them and never gives up on them. And that doesn't mean that you have to, enable them or any of those things, but just believe in them. Love on them until they love themselves. Show them some compassion and understanding because it's not a fun place to be when you're in that position. But I know because I know my story and many others like me that there is hope on the other side. We can recover and we can become some badass people when we do.
Yes, I love it.
If you like today's episode and have an idea for a future episode, please write a review. That's how you help us get the word out to other people that might be interested in our content. Thanks.